everyone. Me, Sital Podial, and Ben will welcome you in the webinar. Today we have folks from Water Division of Water Resources. They're Candace, Heidi, Joss, Madison, Selby, all of these people. They will talk about mainly like how can we plan, conserve, and protect our water so that our future generations here in Utah have the water that they need. And with all that, it's all over to you, Selby. I'll be in the background, and if there's any problem, I'll come up. But Joss, Selby, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're excited to be here today. So you've got our conservation team from the Division of Water Resources. I'm Shelby Cooley, and I'm the conservation section manager. I've been with the Division of Water Resources for about 5.5 years now. And we'll just go around and introduce the rest of us. If you'll go next, Josh.
I'm Josh Zimmerman. I'm a conservation coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. And today I'm going to talk about water conservation plans and a little bit on transparent water billing information. Next is,
Did you say Candace and I missed it? I'll just go. Okay, I'm Candace Shively, also Water Conservation Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. I'm excited to share just a quick overview of our statewide water-wise plant list and then cover some of our statewide rebate programs, specifically smart controllers and toilets. And Heidi, you're up next.
Hey, I'm Heidi King. I'm also with Division of Water Resources. I've been there a couple of years now, and I will be focusing on secondary water use today.
And I'm Madison Martini. I am also a water conservation coordinator with the state. And I will be talking today about the landscape incentive program that I help.
Awesome. Joss, can you pull up the slides now? Or? Great.
Awesome. We'll jump in. Josh, will you go to the next slide, please? All right, here's just a brief agenda of what we'll be covering today. We'll go to the next one, please. All right, so we're with the Utah Division of Water Resources, and our mission is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah's water resources. Next slide. This is our Board of Water Resources. In the bottom right-hand corner is our director, Candace Hassenjaeger. And our board does a lot with providing funding for projects like dam safety projects and projects that are conservation focused, like lining canals, piping, secondary meters, all of that. Next slide. All right, so our water supply in Utah, we rely mainly on snow melt from the mountains. And most of the precipitation that we receive is through October and April. We don't have a lot of rainfall, so we do rely heavily on snow. Our water demand is highest during the summer months because of a lack of rainfall, we do have supplemental irrigation, and about 60% of our water, our municipal and industrial water, is used outside to water our yards, and that happens just during those summer months. Next slide. All right, here are a couple of maps. These are courtesy of USU Extension. On the left is surface water. You can see that we have these primary basins. We have the Great Basin, which includes the Great Salt Lake, and there's also the Upper Colorado River Basin. And then to the right, these are watershed basins, so broken down a little bit more, showing just the landscape of Utah. Next slide. All right, this is from Prep 60, which is a group of water conservancy districts within the state focused on growing and having enough water for our future. This is precipitation versus population. You can see where most of the precipitation is received with the water drops, and then where our population is focused. We have a high density population that goes along what's called the Wasatch Front, goes along the Great Salt Lake, And then we also have a population that's growing pretty quickly in southern Utah in the left-hand corner of the state. Next slide. This is our projected population from the Kempsey-Gardner Policy Institute. You can see we're right between 2020 and 2030, and we are expected to have a big population increase by 2060. Next slide. Along with a growing population, we do have a state that experiences drier periods and wetter periods. This is our drought monitor tracker, and you can see that when we have droughts, they are usually pretty big and will last quite some time. And then we'll have some wetter years. So we have a unique situation where we're planning for the wet years and the dry years and just need to do our best every single year because of the location that we're at. Next slide. This is a fun little slide that is just showing that along with our increasing population, we have our drought severity periods. We also have seen an increase in temperature in this contemporary period. Next slide. Josh, will you go back one? Okay, go forward one. Perfect. Okay. Outdoor watering. So like mentioned earlier, 60% of Utah's water, municipal and industrial, which includes like residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, is used outdoors to water our landscapes. And so we have a big potential to save water by not overwatering, by improving sprinkler efficiency, getting our residents to participate in rebate programs. A big thing is switching from spray irrigation to drip and planting beds, big water savings there, and also alternative grasses, looking at swapping out some higher water grasses to some lower water use ones. Next slide. All right, I think this is my last one. When it comes to long-term water conservation, we can put the methods of getting there into 3 baskets: regulation, incentives, and education. And our team will be going over some of these like water conservation plans, the incentives, education, all of that in our coming slides. But when looking at conservation, it's going to take a lot to get there. We've made some really good progress, and we have more work to do. Next slide. All right, I'll turn it over to Heidi.
Okay, thanks, Shelby. In this next section, I will be covering conservation in regard to secondary water. Secondary water in Utah is a term we use for untreated, unfiltered irrigation water that's specifically used for the landscape. It's mostly found on residential properties, but can also be found on commercial and public properties too. Historically, where it got its name is if a property had ag water, rights tied to it, and then that property was developed and kept those water rights, it went from a primary use of ag to a secondary use of irrigation water for the landscape. The challenge with this water is that it has largely been unmetered in Utah. And because of that, it's really difficult to measure the use as well as detect the leaks that could be coming from that system. And as we know, you cannot conserve what you don't measure. So that's been one of the challenges that we've had. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Josh. So in 2022, the Utah State Legislature passed some legislation that mandated secondary meters be installed for secondary pressurized systems by 2030. These meters have to be installed at the end user. They don't necessarily mandate a source meter. This legislation awarded grant funding with a 70-30 match to these secondary systems. This money came from Congress, so this is federal funds. We got $250 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, to strengthen infrastructure. The primary purpose of this for us was to protect drinking water. In Utah, most of our irrigation water and our culinary drinking water comes from the same sources. So as we conserve and protect our irrigation water, we are also protecting our drinking water at the same time. These systems that are receiving these grant funds are required to meet some standards. One of them includes incorporating an education and conservation piece into their customer billing and a customer portal. It's been found that within Utah, meters on a secondary system with an education component incorporated into it can serve about 20 to 30% of outdoor water use on a residential or commercial property. This is important because, as Shelby mentioned before, about 60% of our municipal and industrial water usage is on the landscape, about 60% of that. So if we can conserve 20 to 30% of that 60%, that is a huge impact that we can make as far as conservation goes in Utah. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a snapshot of that funding that I mentioned. So we were able to get $250 million in federal funds allocated to these meters, and then an additional $15 million from the state legislature for systems that had already installed meters before this mandate, still at that 70-30 cost share for these systems that had installed them for alternative conservation projects if they wanted to do that, such as lining their canals or piping them as well. So this is just a snapshot. It's not all of the projects that we have. However, it gives a really good indication of how big some of these systems are and how small some of them are. Some of these systems are municipalities or water districts that service thousands of customers, and some of them are tiny. They service less than 100 users and are usually made up of a very small board. It's all volunteer based. So we really do have a range of systems in Utah that provide this secondary irrigation water. The red dotted line indicates the money that's been allocated to these systems, and then those green lines indicate what has been spent so far. So we've spent probably about half of what needs to be spent. All of the funds have been allocated, and they should be spent by the end of 2026. On this next slide, go ahead and go to the next one, Josh. So as I mentioned before, an education component is required for those that have received grant funding, and not all of these systems are capable of doing that in-house or have the funds to purchase software for a customer portal that can incorporate this into it. So we do have education materials that are available for free for these systems to be able to distribute to their customers. So we've created a brochure. Hit next, Josh. I'm going to make you do a lot of clicking. So we've made a brochure, some postcards, next one, some flyers, some social media posts for both outdoor landscape stuff and metering. And with the social media, we also have the messaging tied to it. So if you are a very small system and don't know what to caption this with, you have options, and then as well as a website content document if people want to put this on their website. And this is for those systems that are really small. They're usually a neighborhood that uses one canal and have less than 100 users. The board has basically been voluntold and don't necessarily have the capacity to do anything beyond just the basic running of their system. So we do have this as an option for them. And then on this next slide, we have exempt systems. As part of the legislation, there were 4 routes of exemption a system could seek if they weren't able to install meters for one reason, one of these 4 reasons. 3 of these 4 still require some sort of conservation piece. So even though they, for a reason they cannot install those end user meters, they can still conserve water in some way. The 4 routes of exemption include one that requires installing source meters on their system with the help of the Division of Water Rights, which is our sister agency. They're the regulatory arm of water in Utah. This is for systems that rely on stream flow and do not have that storage. So it's a little harder to plan. On years when it's really dry, it's really difficult to know exactly how much water is going through that system. So this will help them conserve water in the long run. Two of the routes of exemption include submitting conservation plans to us, and then they are subjected to an annual evaluation every year and then have to update their water conservation plan. These two include, one is if they have really poor water quality and they cannot get a warranted meter because of the water quality, or if the installation of those meters exceeds their annual budget, then they are not required to install those meters. We only have one system that's followed that route for exemption, and that's because they really couldn't afford it. They wanted to install those meters, but even with that grant cost share of 70-30, that 30% still exceeded their annual budget. So this is the route of exemption that they chose. The last one is if a system resides in a critical groundwater management area. These systems are already working with water rights. They already have a plan in place to help restore their groundwater, and so are therefore exempt from the meter mandate. The next handful of slides focus on the data side of things, which is something we've just started jumping into the last few months as we've gotten the rest of this legislation streamlined and figured out processes and systems for them. Now we get to focus on the data side of it, which is really fascinating. This graph indicates what systems are reporting to us and when they started reporting to us for secondary water. A lot of these systems haven't in the past, but we're starting to get them to reporting to water rights and in our system. So right now we have 218 secondary systems reporting to us, and that's probably about half of the total in Utah. So we still have another 200 more to get into our system. And as we do it, we'll jump to the next slide. As that happens, we'll start to see some changes in these numbers. So these graphs show the number of total connections we have versus the metered connections. So like I said, we will continue to increase these total connections because we only have about half of them in our system. And then of course that metered connection will go up as well. Let's jump to the next one. It will probably take about 5 to 10 more years to get a good foundation for this data, and then another 10 years after that to be able to see actual trends in this data. This data will inform us in how we guide conservation in the future. Like I said before, we cannot conserve what we don't measure, and measuring this will really help us see where the holes in our conservation programs are and what support we can give to these secondary systems as well. This graph shows it's our total source usage, so those source meters that are on canals and other water sources versus the green line is the meter at the end user. So there's a discrepancy between the two, which is usually the system loss, and that's what's in blue. And the system loss is greater than what it should be. It's at about 20%. So we have questions. Where is the water going? Is it because there are leaks in the system? Is it evaporating? Is it people taking water that don't have those water rights? Is it all of these things or things we haven't even considered yet? So as we continue to get more data, we'll be able to get a better picture of how this water is being used and where it's going. Go ahead and go to the next slide. On this last slide, this shows the red and the orange are estimates that we've been using, and we have a few different methods for estimating water usage, but they're not very accurate or precise, as you can see. That green line at the bottom is end user meter use, and the black and the blue are partial metered. So as we get closer to the metered use, it goes down quite a bit. So that estimated usage is about 2 to 3 acre foot per connection every year, whereas the actual use is potentially less than that. So like I said, as we continue to gather this data, it will really inform us of how people are using this water and where those opportunities for conservation exist. And I'm going to pass over the time to Madison to talk about landscape incentives.
Okay, yeah, I'm Madison. So today I'll be talking about the Landscape Incentive Program. This is a program that's been offered in the state and has been known by a few different names in the past. But since 2023, state funding has contributed here at the Division of Water Resources to supporting this program. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that today. So this incentive program is available to homeowners and commercial properties throughout the state of Utah. It promotes these people to convert partial or all of their lawn to some sort of drought tolerant landscaping and water efficient plants. And then in return, those homeowners get back up to $3 per square foot of that grass that they replaced. The purpose of this program is to promote the water conservation that can come from drought tolerant plants. It's been shown that drought tolerant landscapes can save up to 2/3 water compared to overhead spray irrigation on grass, especially in our arid and dry state. And just to give a little bit of information about some requirements that we have for this program and people that participate. These requirements aren't specific to every city. We have a few different water districts that help run these programs, and they might have differing requirements, but generally we do require about 50% plant coverage. So whatever you take out in grass, 50% of that needs to get replaced with some sort of plant to mitigate for heat island effect and environmental damage that way. And we also require that drip irrigation is put in with those plants to help promote their growth, especially at the start. We require that some sort of mulch is put in under those plants, whether it's rock or bark mulch. And then this also varies by city, but generally there are limitations on a homeowner's ability to put concrete or artificial turf in, or at least for our ability to pay them for that. Mostly due to the need for water to be able to infiltrate to the ground in whatever areas the grass is being replaced, as well as some of the environmental effects, heat island effects that come from artificial turf. Okay, next slide. So some more background on this program. There are quite a few cities throughout the state that qualify to participate in this program. And they're able to do so by adopting a certain set of water efficiency ordinances into their municipal code. Those ordinances require new home builds to install water efficient landscaping from the get-go. So we're not continuing to have to replace that landscaping in the future. So currently there are about 105 qualifying cities throughout the state. 72 of those cities are qualified to receive state funding by adopting those water efficiency ordinances. Most of these cities are covered by 4 main water districts: Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, Central Utah Water Conservancy District, Jordan Valley, and Washington County Water Conservancy District. So they'll go out and conduct visits and help homeowners as they enter these programs and convert their landscapes. For any cities that fall outside of those water district boundaries, we here at the Division of Water Resources help cover those qualifying cities, which we've been doing since 2023, so not nearly as long as some of the other water districts have. But currently we have 12 qualifying cities throughout the state, ranging from North Logan all the way down to Moab. So a little bit on the funding side as well. We at the division, we've helped support these programs since 2023 and what the divisions are doing to help fund these programs. So as part of that funding, we help provide half of that rebate, up to $1.50, to those districts as they pay that out to the participants. Next slide. Okay, and then I just wanted to share some statistics about this program, how it's been going since the Division of Water Resources has been involved. These are statistics for 2023. And the print on the right is a little bit small, but just to give you kind of a general gist, this is some statistics from each water conservancy district and what they reported for the year, including applications that they received, how much grass was replaced, and how much they paid out in rebates. Generally, across all the water districts and across the areas that we covered, We replaced more than 3 million square feet of grass in 2023, which in turn saved about 87 million gallons of water annually, which is a big deal when you think about water conservation and the fact that these small landscape changes can cumulatively make a big difference. Next slide. And then we do have some statistics so far for the 2024 as we're wrapping up the year. These statistics aren't current or aren't going to be final for the whole year. We're still wrapping up a few numbers. These numbers are also a little bit inflated compared to last year's numbers because they're not just including grass that's been replaced, but also grass that's been prevented, meaning any rebates or incentives that are paid out to homeowners to install water efficient landscaping instead of grass to begin with. And so these numbers are ongoing and we'll have final numbers, but for now we're sitting at about 123 million gallons of water saved through programs like this. For residential projects, so far about 1,400 have been conducted, 2.3 million square feet of non-functional grass has been replaced or prevented, and 4.6 million has been paid out to homeowners. We also have some more specific numbers for commercial and municipal projects, including about 500 projects, 660,000 square feet, and 1.5 million paid out to these homeowners. So far for the year, I think we're more than on track to meet our 2023 statistics when looking just at grass replacements, if not potentially exceeding them. Okay, last slide. Okay, and I just wanted to go over some of our goals and plans at the state, what we're working toward, what we're hoping to see in the next year or so. Of course, we would love to see an increase in the number of participating cities. This is how residents are able to qualify to participate in this program. And we know as more cities adopt these water efficiency ordinances, their residents will be able to participate and therefore more water conservation will be happening in those areas. We also want to continue to share more conservation success stories. These pictures are from Tooele City Hall, who recently finished their project over the summer. And it just kind of showcases some of that effort of what they've done, especially as an example to their city. We also were working to get some feedback from participants of this program. There's a couple water districts that put out surveys to participants when they're done, but we're working to make a statewide comprehensive survey for participants of this program so we can collect some feedback on their experience, what materials they purchased, what education resources are valuable to them, as well as looking at what their spending was and comparing that to how much we're providing as an incentive to make sure that what we're offering is actually enticing to them signing up. A few other things that we're working to do, we've been working to map out participation across the state. So we have been looking at where people are participating and putting dots on a map, making a heat map to show concentration of what areas across the state that these programs are most popular. And better trying to assess where people are in relation to their water district providers and how we can better market to people where maybe there's not as many participants right now. Additionally, we're trying to provide more resources to homeowners. This is always an ongoing effort. We know that homeowners aren't experts on landscaping. They often don't know how to start or where to begin. And so by providing more resources that reach every audience, whether it's reading material, classes, videos, things like that, that will help homeowners to feel more confident in conducting their transformations or who they hire. And then lastly, we're working on looking at research. We know that water savings are happening and we're able to estimate these numbers, but we're hoping to look at actual water bill data from participants of this program in the state and kind of make a judgment of whether these people are actually seeing a reduction in their water use after they perform these landscape transformations. So as we continue to try and improve this program, we hope that we see more water conservation happening. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Candace.
Awesome. Thanks, Madison. I'm going to share a quick overview of our statewide WaterWise plant list, which is a tool that our team's been working really hard on, and then share some highlights from our statewide toilet and smart controller rebate program. So to start, this WaterWise plant list is a tool that we just launched a few months ago. It's a project that will probably never be done and just continuously improve over time. To get started as a user, if you're not familiar with your plant hardiness zone, there's an option within the tool to determine that based on your address. And then from there, it'll generate a list of water-wise plants that will grow well in your location. And then from there, you can narrow it down even further by selecting different filters. So if you only want to see perennials or shrubs, you have that option. If you prefer to only see native plants, you can kick that filter on as well. I'm going to throw a link to this in the chat box so you guys have that. Next slide, please. So why did we create this? So there's a lot of excellent plant lists available across the state, but none of them are truly statewide. None include all plant types, meaning like perennial shrubs, trees, etc. And many of the lists are static, and they don't allow for customization based on user need. And so we really saw an opportunity to create something dynamic and interactive, and something that highlights the water needs of plants versus just being included on a water-wise plant list. So to build this resource, Heidi and I sat down and we gathered every plant list that we could find across the state, and we compiled them into a single database. And currently we have over 800 different plant genre and species. We decided to avoid including varieties, individual varieties, really just for simplicity. Availability of varieties changed pretty frequently, and things got kind of messy when we started throwing those in there. So an alternative was that on each plant card, we're including suggested varieties within each genus and species. Adding photos is something that we're working on right now. Each plant will have a feature where multiple images can be highlighted in a carousel. And then within each plant, we have like a detailed description across the bottom that just highlights the variety of within that particular photo, time of year the photo was taken, where it was taken, if we know that. And we would love some help with this. So if you would like to get involved, I'm going to throw a link in the chat box here. So if you'd like to contribute to our photo catalog or even just share tips or your experience growing these plants, you can use that link in the chat box to share your feedback, and we'll give you photo credit within that. Oh, I lost the presentation. Did we lose Josh?
No, Josh is here, so I will ask Josh. Okay, we're getting there. Awesome.
Good. Perfect. Josh, will you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is my favorite part. So one of the cool features of the list is that it's not just a list of plants that you're able to filter. Each plant is assigned a water use classification. And so when you click on that water use classification, it links out to more information explaining what a water use classification is. And then it also links out to a calculator that will help the user estimate water need and develop an irrigation schedule. Next slide, please. So this landscape water management tool is my favorite part. It just helps the user get an idea of what an irrigation schedule might look like for plants in their landscape or plants that they're purchasing once they're established. And it takes into account their site considerations, like their location, soil type, and other items. For now, this tool is just for established plants, but we're working on something similar to help folks determine an establishment schedule for new things that they're planting in their landscape. And the hope is to help reduce the number of folks that program their controller to run for 5 minutes twice a day, every day for the entire season and sometimes beyond. Next slide, please. So in addition to being a resource for those that participate in the Landscape Incentive Program, this tool is also a resource for plant nurseries and their customers. The idea is that a customer, the thought is that customers and staff the staff are typically seasonal and may not have a ton of plant experience or really understand what the water requirements of the plants that they're selling or on the customer end, what the plants that they're purchasing are. So the idea is that this tool can be used within the nursery and promoted at the nursery as a shopping assistant to help the customer identify what the water need of the plant is that they're purchasing. Next slide, please. So moving on to rebates, we also manage a statewide rebate program for WaterSense toilets and smart irrigation controllers. Utah Water Savers, which is a website listed on the slide, it's fantastic. It's a one-stop portal for all of these programs, which simplifies access to rebates statewide. So rather than having dozens of cities and water districts all offering separate programs, Utah has one online portal that serves the entire state. Next slide, please. So one of the roles of our conservation team is to support and collaborate with agencies and organizations across the state to identify need and acquire and develop resources and implement programming. Utah is a beautiful state. The topography is quite diverse. Our elevation ranges from a little over 2,000 square feet above sea level on up to over 13,000 feet above sea level. So implementing statewide programs can be a bit of a challenge. So as you can imagine, collaboration and partnership really is key. And as Madison mentioned in the landscape incentive presentation, our partnership with these water districts have made these programs a success. And these partnerships allow us to process applications locally while providing a centralized place for support and funding. Next slide, please. So just to take a closer look at our two statewide rebate programs. So our Smart Controller program launched in 2018, and it offers homeowners up to $100 towards a purchase of a WaterSense labeled weather-based irrigation controller. These water savings that you're seeing are pretty significant, and they're based on estimates from the WaterSense Partner Calculator, which is a great resource for anyone interested in calculating potential savings of products that they're rebating. And it's available on their partner website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. Next slide, please. Our toilet program launched in 2019 and offers up to $150 for the replacement of older toilets that use more than 1.6 gallons per flush with WaterSense labeled models. And homeowners can get up to two rebates per toilet. Wow, 2 rebates per property. 2 toilets per property. That was a struggle. Since these programs have been implemented, we estimate that the savings of these 2 combined programs have saved the state of Utah approximately 462 million gallons of water, which is a really great example of how small changes can have a big impact. Next slide, please. I wanted to wrap up my portion of the presentation with a plug for the EPA WaterSense program. Last year, we received an award from them for excellence in promoting WaterSense labeled products. If you're not familiar with WaterSense, it's a fantastic program. Membership is free. They provide a lot of great resources like the savings calculator I mentioned earlier. Many of these resources are especially helpful for organizations with small conservation teams or limited social media and like graphic design support. We are really grateful for the WaterSense certification process, which ensures that products we recommend and promote through our rebate program meet EPA standards for efficiency and performance, which gives us and the public confidence that these products save water without compromising quality. And with that, I will turn it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you, Candace. So as Chantal mentioned, our topic today is how to protect resources and conserve for the future. And in 1998, our legislature had the wisdom to enact the Water Conservation Plan Act. And that act is in an effort to get those that supply water to have them create a document that is public facing that shows their efforts to conserve water and how much their population might grow. This slide, our first slide here, is the nuts and bolts requirements of the Water Conservation Plan Act. So the Water Conservation Plan Act It applies to water providers that have over 500 service connections to culinary end users. It applies to each water conservancy district within the state, and it also applies to entities that are applying for state funding. So once you meet the 500 connection threshold, you're required to do a water conservation plan update every 5 years. Each plan needs to have a overall water reduction goal, along with an implementation plan, a timeline, and an evaluation process to measure progress. It needs to be adopted in an open public meeting with the proper notice requirements for each city, district, or whichever entity is offering the plan. And once the plan is adopted, it needs to be submitted to the Division of Water Resources, along with the public notice, the meeting minutes, and the adoption and signature page. Once the Division of Water Resources receives that plan, we post it on our website. So the Water Conservation Plan Act started in 1998. There was an update right after that in 1999, and then it went a long ways. I think until 2016 is when rates kind of were added to the legislation, and they've become a component of water conservation plans. And then in 2 legislative sessions ago, there was a new requirement for water conservation plans, and that has to deal with adopting the regional conservation goal. And so within the legislation, there are 3 different options that plan authors can take. One is to adopt the regional conservation goal that's in their area. 2 is to adopt a goal that results in more water being conserved than the goal. And then the third option is to create a goal that results in less conservation than the conservation goal, with a justification as to why the goal can't be met. With that, we'll transition to the regional conservation goals a little bit so you can understand what those mean. So regional conservation goals is municipal and industrial water conservation goals that are set to be accomplished by the year 2030. Within this document, it also has projections out to 2040 and 2065 for planning purposes. Those are projections. So as we reach 2030 and as we continue to make conservation progress, we can always amend those goals and update them to the progress that has been made through the different regions of our state. This is the 9 different regions that have conservation goals that are specific to their area. As was mentioned before, both geographically from north to south and with topography and elevation, there are many different factors that go into how to use water efficiently in our state and how to manage water effectively. So these different regions have attributes that are specific to each of the areas. So to aid in the success of creating a solid water conservation plan, the Division of Water Resources has created a checklist it's actually a guide. It's a guiding document to walk you through it. And we have 3 steps that if authors follow these steps, they have a likely chance of having a solid water conservation plan on their first draft. So step 1 is to review the guide and the best management practices that we have on our website. Step 2 is if you get a draft to our office before or on July 15th, we will have it reviewed via our conservation team, and our planning team will also review that for content. And then the final step is to have your timeline in order so that you can have your public meeting and have your plan adopted before the 31st of each year of the year. So here is our website. Each of these are buttons that you can click on to see our guiding document, best management practices, and then example plans from other cities within our state. It also has the contact information on there for below for where you can submit your plan. That wraps up the water conservation plan aspect. Another fun and interesting and kind of cutting edge area that our team gets to work on is transparent water billing. And transparent water billing's kind of a cryptic name, but basically what this program is for grant money to do education outreach so that end users, so customers that are living at a house or can understand their bill and they can get information to make changes to reduce their water use. The Division of Water Resources does a 50-50 match cost share on this with entities that we go under contract with. And many times there's a collaboration between the Division of Water Resources, a city or a company that does billing. And then there's also, they hire a third party or a software service company to provide these services. We require that there is reporting on the effectiveness of the tactics that are used. And we strongly encourage leak detection. And our application window is currently open, and it will be open through January 31st. So why does the state of Utah choose to do a 50-50 cost share to increase the effectiveness of billing? So we know that there's a lot of water users that don't see their bills. They have automatic bill pay. It just gets paid. Their water bills might be a little bit harder to understand, and they open it up and it doesn't make sense to them. And that's exactly what this money is in an effort to solve that problem. It's also relatively inexpensive to close this disconnect in knowledge when you compare it to water infrastructure, to communication towers, to data storage. When you compare it to how inexpensive it is to implement an effective billing campaign, it really is a really great opportunity to extend our supplies and reduce our water use. There's also advantages of when you go under contract and do the cost share, that you'll get expertise that analyzes how your water is used, and they have visual aids that can aid in decision making, and you can see who's using water at what time they're using water, and then we can effectively communicate to those users at the right time. With how effective the billing companies are at sending out water bills, it's too common that individual water use data isn't getting closely looked at. And through doing these programs and this grant, it creates an opportunity for utilities and water experts to take a close look at their water use and who's using that water and contact the right people. Examples of what we track and what we try to be effective in reducing water use is using emails to reach people. A lot of people open up emails, but even a greater percentage open up texts. They also open up their text almost immediately after it comes to their phone. There is a huge amount of wonderful portals out there that share a lot of water use information, and we try to strategically increase the amount of people that are accessing those portals and seeing their water use. We integrate with companies that do online bill pay to make their water use and understanding their water use a part of seeing their bill. There's incentives like if your community has a golf course, that you could say, if you log in and see your water use data, you'll be put in a lottery to get a ticket for a free day of golf. There's also other things we can use with social media, like we can work on our tone or our humor, or maybe we want to be a bit snarky with our messaging, and we can track how effective each of those are in being opened or if people take action. Also, there's a aspect called social norming where high water users will come down to average if they are made aware that they're using more water than their neighbors or their average neighbor. And that is an aspect that we can use to motivate people to reduce their water use. As I mentioned, this is a exciting program, and it's actually really enjoyable work to do this, and it is currently open for funding. So if you're at a city or if you are working with cities that would be interested in doing this, please have them reach out to our office. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Shelby.
All right, thank you, Josh. Chantal asked us to cover how Utahns can get involved. So a lot of this is just learning and sharing. Participate in a rebate program. You know, if you do a landscape conversion or get a smart controller, show your friends, tell your friends, neighbors talk. And that can definitely make a difference. Also being civically involved, attending city meetings, knowing what's going on in your area. Also, if you see, programs or initiatives that you'd like to see within our state, contacting your legislators and letting them know what you would like to see. You can help shape the future of our state. So encourage being civically involved. And then just also recognize that we're all part of the solution. Water conservation and ensuring a secure water future takes all of us. And so all doing our part is an important piece to getting where we want to be. Here's a little plug for our social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram and have some helpful content, some great things to share as far as messaging. And Josh, will you do the next slide? All right, and that is it for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the first question was, many cities don't want to change their local ordinances. When do you think the state will mandate versus leaving it up to the local city or entity? You guys have any thoughts on that one?
So there is value in it being grassroots and coming up through the city and getting adopted by the councils. And we know that citizens that are in those areas, if they reach out to their council members and let them know that this is what they want and attend those public meetings and get it adopted, that's great. One of the tools that Water Resources has is our funding for the landscape incentive programs is tied to passing water efficient standards. So that's an incentive for cities and councils to adopt those standards so that their residents are eligible for that funding. And so those are tools that Water Resources is using to address that issue. And if water efficient standards were to become available statewide, that would be a huge reduction in water use and be an asset as well. But those are the tools that we have available to us.
Thanks, Josh. And the second question is from Edward. Before Ben read this, I mean, I read it and it seems like, I mean, that is true. Like, Ben, can you go over the question and we just will discuss a little bit on this?
Yeah, so I had a question and then kind of some backup information for it. But what type of follow-up does the DWR provide to the end user concerning the proper care of the drought-tolerant plant material? So after they put in their landscape. And then the scenario that they put in from Edward, he says the problem that we see here in Southern California is after customers change out their landscape to conform to the new mandates, such as what are you considering or using your water districts using? The landscapes over time end up looking pitiful and overgrown, or the customers still maintain their old habits, which defeats the purpose and the goals of conserving water. So after Southern California basically has implemented similar programs, they don't have information on how to care for the new landscape. They're not used to it versus grass. Do we have anything or any thoughts on that or follow up or anything?
I can take this one. Yeah, right now, a lot of our education is centered on the front end when they're transforming their landscape. When they sign up, there's a lot of education materials. And a lot of that does center on how to take care of these landscapes when they're done. However, it obviously is up to the homeowner and how committed they are to that when they're done. We don't typically send people out and knock on doors and say, hey, you didn't maintain this well. It's not really our responsibility, but that is definitely a lack and a bridge that we want to gap, or a gap we want to bridge. And so that's part of the materials that we're creating is follow-up emails, tips and tricks. We have a lot of resources like lawn watering guides that are available to homeowners, some of which is for drought tolerant landscapes. And so we hope that homeowners see that these resources are available to them and use them, and take care of their landscape after it's done as well. But yeah, still work in progress.
Awesome. Yeah, and I agree. And I always keep telling this, it's not the plant that use water, right? It's how much we apply.
Would you consider lowering the plant coverage requirement if you require organic mulch instead of rock? So like the 50% when you change out your lawn to desert plants or water wise plants. I got some more of the question. Any thoughts on that one?
So I'll just say, and Madison covered this, the program is run by different administrators, so water districts that we're partnered with. And so they're able to set the plant coverage requirements. So that could be a potential consideration. Right now, though, the general requirement is the 50% plant coverage at maturity, perennial plant coverage. But that's a consideration for sure.
And kind of a follow-up with that one is, how do you monitor 50% vegetation? I guess probably.
Yeah, I can take this. So it is something I didn't mention, but it's based on the maturity size of the plant. So from those pictures that I showed of the Tooele City Hall conversion, those plants were really tiny because they had just installed that landscape. So when we're out doing visits, we take that into consideration and recognize that a lot of those plants are going to be a lot bigger than they are at the start. We are not out there with like yardsticks measuring the size of the plants. We're not calculating the specific circumference of every single plant and what it will be. It's more of an eyeball estimate based on the plant expertise that our team has and what they estimate it's going to look like when it's mature, and then take that 50% plant coverage as a eyeball estimate.
Okay, thank you. And we just had a question on finding this recording afterwards. So we do post all the recordings of all the water well, seawell onto YouTube. It takes us a week or two to get them up because we have to do the captioning on them. But if you're wanting to rewatch this recording, it'll be up in a week or two.
And I'll put that link in the chat, the playlist where they'll come up.
Awesome. Another question is, could you please talk about how long the water conservation would be achieved after landscape conversion from lawn to low water, for instance? How long the water conservation would be achieved after landscape conversion? If I read that correct.
Oh.
I don't know if I quite get that one. If you wanted a clarification, we could put that. Type it in there. Another one, this is for Candace, is how would you find out about the April program? So you mentioned the webinar series that you're going to start in April. How would we find out about that?
That's a good question. I don't have any information at the moment, but I'm really hoping to use Satal and his email contact list to get the word out to folks. So just keep an eye on your email.
Glad to do that, Candace, whenever you want.
Appreciate it.
I would like to read this one. Why is the DWR staff so awesome? I don't know, right? They are awesome. So I just know that. Great working with them. Good.
Okay, does taking out lawn and installing low water plants such as natives closely planted achieve water conservation? And I think there's a couple slides on the water savings, I believe, from the water districts that we went over too. So that might be something to go back and rewatch. But they had the water districts submitted the water savings that they found through doing the water conservation programs.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you all. This was a wonderful presentation, and I surely learned a lot. So I hope everyone enjoyed it and found it to be useful. Thanks. Thanks.